Good evening. These are admittedly strange times. Our lives are not what they once were. Today, some of you spent hours homeschooling your children, while some of you spent hours haggling with the government for unemployment relief. Some of you stress-baked sourdough, while some of you didn't have bread to eat. Some of you stealth Googled marital separation during quarantine, while some of you swiped right on Tinder and then swiped right again and then swiped right again and again and again and again, because that is how you have sex now. Me, I've been researching whether sideburns grow back ever since my wife gave me a haircut in our bathroom.
I mean, is this going to be like a new thing?
Also, don't have to talk about my relationship issues because...
I am your relationship issues.
Right.
You can still talk about them. I'd love to hear.
And I've been thinking about how to launch a TV news show during a crisis without precedent. And what better way to launch it than with my guests today, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, who's going to talk about the future of the progressive movement, the comedian Seth MacFarlane, who's going to open up, I hope, about his private conversations and dealings with the Murdochs and Fox News, and Taylor Mack playing some music for us. But first, I just want to say to all of you, welcome. Take a seat at the table. That's what this new show is called, Seat at the Table. Because when we started dreaming up this program only a few months ago, back when social distancing was just my personal experience of middle school, we were so oblivious to what loomed on the horizon that we named the show after a highly irresponsible act now, gathering with strangers around a table. Back then, in the days of handshakes and dinners with friends and daily underwear changes, the world felt like it was shifting and demanding new scrutiny. A populist movement questioning free market dogma was on the rise. Xenophobic nationalism was on the rise. Keanu Reeves was on the rise in a phenomenon known as the Keanu-sance. Back then, it seemed like we needed a show where we could process these changes, where we could talk and actually listen above the din of everyone yelling in a 9-way split screen with Don Lemon, where people who don't typically have a seat at the table could sit down and speak up and say all the things they couldn't normally say. A show where we could question and challenge power. Now, though, the world that was changing appears to be collapsing. The virus is ravaging the nation. March and April saw what might possibly be the highest unemployment rates since the Great Depression. Britney Spears is Instagramming writers calling for Marxist revolution. Now the very idea of power itself, who has it, and how they wield it, is no longer a matter of intellectual debate. It's a matter of life and death. For people on the margins of society, it always has been. What we're seeing, in fact, is not a new America. What we're seeing is an America exposed for what it was. Every element of this unfolding crisis is a product of the collective choices we have made in the past. Gutting the social safety net, denying workers a living wage, warehousing people in overcrowded prisons, defunding pandemic prevention while spending billions fighting an imaginary war in space. Or is it on space? War on space? Only Mike Pence knows for sure. If we missed these things before, now with our roads empty, our skies clear, our supply chain short on ventilators, and our store shelves stripped of all-purpose flour, the essential separated from the non-essential, now we can see them clearly. We can see the hard realities we've been too self-interested or apathetic or bamboozled to see. A recent New York Times op-ed put it starkly. If inequality had frozen at 1980s levels, hadn't been allowed to yawn ever wider, the bottom 90% of American households, 90%, would each see $12,000 a year more in income. In other words, most of you watching this, except the billionaires, are effectively sending the billionaires $1,000 a month. Except you're not sending it, it's being taken from you via policy. In New York City, Central Park and the Javits Center are being converted into field hospitals. Meanwhile, in recent years, around 20 of the city's struggling hospitals, indoor hospitals, were shut down instead of being bailed out. Many of them turned into housing, despite concerns by lawmakers and activists that closing them would compromise the health needs of the lower-income communities they served. Some, like St. Vincent's, were transformed into luxury condos for the rich. Isn't that nice? Selling for as much as $19 million. Which is why, even as this show's title suggests an activity that is presently hazardous, we remain as committed as ever to its original vision and purpose. We do need to talk, not just about the news per se, not about what happened in the last 24 hours, but about the root causes we haven't been talking about, things about ourselves, about our society that have been hidden for far too long. And something I want to discuss with you on tonight's show and in the weeks to come is this. What will the legacy of this crisis be? What will we make of the massive upheaval we're currently experiencing? Who will we be on the other side? This is not a new question. As The Atlantic reminds us, it's a question that goes back at least as far as the French Revolution, when the righteous anger of rioting French peasants of 1789 mutated into a brutal reign of terror. Or, more recently, as noted by Rahm Emanuel in the wake of the 2008 financial crash, you never want a serious crisis to go to waste.
I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic, I'm hopeful.
Whereupon that crisis was immediately allowed to go to waste. Incredibly, barely a decade later, we are living that moment again. The scramble has already begun, Rebecca Solnit wrote recently in the New York Times. The possibilities for change, for the better or the worse, for a more egalitarian or more authoritarian society, burst out of the gate like racehorses at times like these. It's easy to be cynical about who will prevail in this contest, given the advantages of those with entrenched power, and given what we've witnessed time and time again. Because in that scramble to fix a broken system, chaos reigns, time is short, legislation is rushed through, and in the smoke of the raging fire, it's often the arsonists who rush in to be the firefighters, costume and everything. I see you, debt financiers in Puerto Rico. I see you, charter school advocates in New Orleans. As Naomi Klein warned in her book, The Shock Doctrine, crises can be a boom time for corrupt politicians and big corporations. If we don't stay focused on designing real solutions in a time like this, if we don't make that our work, lobbyists are more than happy to relieve us of the task. You may have heard that big business in France has wanted for years to get rid of that country's 35-hour work week, a cornerstone of its labor law, not to be confused with America's 35-hour work day. Well, guess when they finally got it done? After the virus struck. Closer to home, the Trump administration appears to have used the chaos of the coronavirus outbreak to relax environmental regulations indefinitely, a boon for polluters and a realization of its long-standing deregulation agenda, and a perfect solution to a pandemic. But crises can also go the other way. Throughout history, disasters, natural and man-made, have served to topple entrenched power, to bring about the end of decadent Gilded Ages, to give rise to eras of reform. We do not always respond to shocks with regression, Naomi Klein writes. Sometimes, in the face of crisis, we grow up fast. The cataclysm of the Civil War produced the Reconstruction Amendments, laying the groundwork for true democracy in America for the first time. The exploitation of child and immigrant labor in the Gilded Age led to the Fair Labor Standards Act and other protections of FDR's New Deal. The riots that engulfed our cities in the wake of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination led to the passage of the Fair Housing Act and the adoption of widespread affirmative action policies in colleges and the workplace. We can do this right when we try. In fact, I would say, especially to the young people watching, that in addition to being a time of tragedy and pain and the shattering of stability, we may also soon be living in the greatest moment of political possibility you will know in your lifetimes. The important questions for me, for you, and for this show are why and how. That is what we're going to seek to set out to answer together, week after week. Why did one crisis go that way served to entrench power, while the other went the other way, helping to erode it? How do we not only chase away the plague, but also leave in its wake a more just and equitable distribution of power? How do we solve the crisis not superficially, but at the root? Not for some, but for all. Especially at a time like this, when the traditional power-building tools of organizing and door-knocking are impossible. Historically, Arundhati Roy writes in the Financial Times, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, she writes. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. Right now, things may seem dark and hopeless. As I speak to you, mass graves are being dug in New York City to handle an overflow of bodies. In less than 2 months, more than 40,000 Americans have died. To put it in perspective, that's the number of people who died in 9/11, the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, the Johnstown flood, 3 of the country's deadliest hurricanes, Pearl Harbor, and the ranks of U.S. soldiers in the Iraq War combined. Depending on how we act today, we could still lose tens, even hundreds of thousands more. Perhaps you've lost someone you love, or you've just spent a harrowing 2 weeks in the ICU yourself. Or maybe you're one of the lucky ones. And your biggest problem right now is knowing more than you ever hoped to about big cat possession in Oklahoma. That and needing to get back to the office so you can resume spending more time with your work husband than your quarantine husband, aka your husband. Either way, the good news is that this crisis has exposed more than a country with gaping holes in its medical supply chains and its social safety net. It has also exposed the tremendous courage, decency, and resilience of everyday people, many of whom, just 6 weeks ago, our society did not even deem essential. Every day we see UPS drivers risking their lives to make sure we get our sweet, sweet toilet paper on time. I hope mine arrives soon. Every day we see neighbors risking their lives to bring an elderly stranger a bag of groceries. Every day we see nurses risking their lives, MacGyvering trash bags into hazmat suits. And if we can harness that, if we can take that energy and that civic spirit and find out how to channel it and how to sustain it, then we, as citizens, will decide what lies on the other side of that door. We did not choose this crisis. Who would? But we can try to shape its consequences. We can interrogate power. We can work to change other people's minds and be open to changing our own. We, on this show, can ask more probing questions and listen more deeply for answers. We can make you think and perhaps, even in a time like this, make you laugh. And we can equip you with the truths you need to do the one job from which you can never be laid off, that of citizen. That is what this show will do. So welcome, one and all, to a seat at the table. And when I come back after a short break, I will be at this very table, so to speak, with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Stay with us. The new epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic in the United States lurks within a single congressional district in New York City. This district, spanning Queens and the Bronx, was until recently home to an Uber driver named Anil Sabha and a hospital manager named Priscilla Caro. I say until recently because this plague killed them both. Anil died at Elmhurst Hospital, which is where Priscilla worked as a manager and was exposed by a patient. It's probably no coincidence that this very congressional district, the heart of this crisis, has achieved that status because of pre-existing structural conditions that made it especially vulnerable to this virus. And it's no coincidence that that district in 2018 elected a firebrand of a representative to its U.S. House seat. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a hero and a lightning rod of the progressive movement, was a key surrogate for Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, and in what may be her biggest accomplishment to date, is seat at the table's very first guest. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Ocasio-Cortez.
Of course, thank you for having me.
So I want to begin by asking you something I probably wouldn't ask you in normal times. I would just skip over. We've seen you doing live streams and delivering groceries to folks and making statements and making proposals. I actually wonder how you're holding up personally through this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. It's been tough. It is a huge emotional toll. That emotional toll is nowhere near what a lot of our frontline workers are experiencing. But as a leader in this community, as a public servant to this community, it's very difficult. I frequently and routinely have to call family members, congregations, and people in our community offering condolences day in and day out. I have to talk to teenage kids who have lost their parents. I have to talk to spouses that have lost their husband or wife of several decades. I have to talk to people who say, where am I going to get my next meal? Or am I going to be evicted from my apartment next month? And it is extremely difficult to have those conversations and feel like we don't have the federal leadership that's required to give them a good answer.
You're clearly someone with a well-formed worldview. No one has called you wishy-washy. You have a way of looking at these issues. I wonder if this pandemic has actually made you see or think or believe anything that you didn't see or think or believe before.
Yeah, I think this pandemic has done that for a lot of people. I think if anything, what it has done for me is just add clarity and add a finer and sharper point to a lot of what we've already been advocating for. In any other circumstance, I would have been a frontline worker had things not worked out the same, had my primary not turned out the same way 2 years ago. And I know what it's like to not have insurance. I know what it's like to get on public transit and be scared, even if it's not necessarily about acquiring a disease, but, scared of being mugged or scared of getting on at 3:00 in the morning, scared of not having health insurance. And so I don't think it's necessarily changed any of my underlying beliefs, but it's made them more urgent, I think.
I want to ask you a little bit about your education as a member of Congress. I sometimes think about in my work, a lot of people I write about, to get things done, there's often an inside game and an outside game. And in your line of work, the outside game is some of the stuff you have done so effectively. Drive conversation, command attention for a set of issues you want to talk about, make people focus on your thing instead of the other thing. I wonder what your education has been like on that second front that we see less, about how you get things done by playing the inside game.
There's a tactic that organizers use called power mapping. And you essentially start mapping out relationships and nodes of power, almost like this web or this network in your mind, or you do it, some people do it physically on paper. And that's a lot of the work the inside work that I think I tried to do, is figure out like the power map, figure out unusual alliances, try to find areas of vulnerability that can be leveraged to create pressure on leadership, and pairing that. But also part of that inside game has also been supporting primary challengers, because ultimately, if the board is stacked for the rich and the powerful, even within the Democratic Party, which it is, the board is stacked for corporations in the Democratic Party, and for the very wealthy. And again, I'm going to be kind of like, people are going to be upset at me for saying that, but it's true. So long as the wealthy control most of political donations to either party, they're the ones who are listened to. So long as the board is stacked that way, sometimes the only choice that you have in certain situations is to change the pieces on the board.
We can enact change in this country, but it takes all of us, and we all have to mobilize. And beyond just organizing for this election, I want all of us to think about how we want to make this part of our lives.
Watching you in some of your last appearances campaigning for Bernie, you had a stump before, but in some of the last ones, you seem to be delivering to close AOC watchers, I consider myself one of them, a message to the movement about what it means to be uncompromising about some of these values, but also be more open-armed, give more of a ramp to people who are not fully down with the program, but might be pulled in. Can you talk about that need? That's something, that you've been attacked when you post so much as a video of Elizabeth Warren dancing. Is there an issue of this movement not having enough of a ramp for other folks?
I think what's really important is that, again, it's not about giving up your principles and it's not about changing your positions, but it is about opening up your posture. Because if we're just about finger wagging and nagging and shaming people into positions, and sometimes that needs to be done in our politics. Sometimes a lot of times, politicians and pundits deserve to be shamed. But it's not the only thing that we can do, and it's not the only tool that we have. And sometimes the most persuasive way that I find to bringing people into the fold is what my mentor called the golden gate of retreat, is that you create a path for someone that perhaps it started out a conversation disagreeing with you. If you can create a path for them to find common ground with you, for them to land in your conclusion without necessarily conceding that they were wrong, but perhaps coming to the same conclusion in a different way, you can create consensus.
It's fascinating. So I want to, after we come back from a short break, talk to you about Joe Biden. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back. I'm back with Representative Ocasio-Cortez. I want to ask you about Joe Biden. You have said you will be voting for Joe Biden, but you have yet to endorse him. Your teams have talked. He doesn't actually seem to be moving in your direction at all right now. Are there 2 or 3 things that he could commit to out of the potential galaxy of them where you would be surprised enough to say, okay, didn't see that coming, you have my endorsement now?
Probably healthcare, climate change, and the third is really tough. It could be immigration, it could be reining in Wall Street, it could be stopping money in politics, movement on Puerto Rico. I think the third one, there's a lot. But in terms of also just getting past the post, I'm not here to needle, and I'm not here to just try to score a point, as I've said before. I think these are real concessions that need to be made in order for us to win in November. To have, if you actually look at the history of who wins these elections, the Democrat who's gotten the nomination has not been able to win in November without youth support in a long time. And right now, where I think we're at is we have a nominee that does not have very large youth support, at least it's not particularly enthusiastic, has not performed well with Latino electorates in key states like Arizona, Colorado, key swing states that we need to get to 270. And so I think that these are changes that need to be made in order for us to win. I'm really concerned. And, I'm really kind of tired of people looking back at 2016 and again, hectoring people for staying home without us being introspective about the fact that we had 2 historically unpopular candidates. People can go into why, and maybe they shouldn't have been, this, that, and the other. Fact of the matter is, two historically unpopular candidates that was an overwhelmingly deflating election for a lot of people. And without introspection about why that was or what changes need to be made, if we try to run the 2016 playbook all over again, we are taking an enormous, enormous risk. And so, again, this is not about scoring a point. This is about making necessary changes so that Donald Trump does not get reelected.
This is a battle for the soul of the United States of America.
When Joe Biden says to wealthy donors, under me, nothing would fundamentally change, do you think he, in his heart, wants the America you want, but he just has a different view of what's possible? Or do you think fundamentally he does not want America to change in the ways that you want it to change?
I do not know what is in Joe Biden's, head, or I don't, know what's in his heart. I know he wants what is good for people, but I also understand that, the role that he has historically played in the Senate and as vice president and throughout his entire career has been this idea of kind of this American norm. And I think that's a lot of what the candidacy is staked on, is like norms and civility and respectability. And just normal was not working for a lot of us. Normal does not work for millennials. It doesn't work for people of color. It doesn't work for any of that. And so I think, what it does work for, what, going back to normal does work for, are affluent suburban voters that both parties are very much fighting over.
Can we hear it for all our NYCHA residents that came down here today? Can we hear it for our public housing advocates that came down here today? Can we hear it for our intersectional environmental justice champions who came down here to Washington, D.C. to fight for our future and reject the paradigm that environmental justice must come at the cost of our jobs or our economic well-being? We know that's not true.
I think it's really important that that we push, because I don't think we can just trust that things are going to move in a progressive direction because the clock is ticking. We have to fight for it. And fighting for things often means that you get labeled as radical and a firebrand and difficult and inconvenient and not a team player, because team players buckle up and saddle in and they stay quiet and they don't make people uncomfortable. And there's something to be said for that, but that's never been who I am.
A lot of people watching this are locked at home with only some content on TV or an internet connection if they're lucky. Can you recommend some of the artists and writers out there that people can be watching and reading in this time who have helped you and who you think are at the vanguard of shifting the consciousness of this country right now?
What we need to do, an act of rebellion, is engaging in the creation of art. And so whether it's reading bell hooks, whether it's listening to radical music, whether it's reading theory, reading about the history of the Black Panthers and their establishment of mutual aid. I think there's a lot that we could be doing right now, but ultimately I think when we talk about this idea of reopening society, only in America does the president, when the president tweets about liberation, does he mean go back to work? When we, have this discussion about going back or reopening, I think a lot of people should just say, no, we're not going back to that. We're not going back to working 70-hour weeks just so that we could put food on the table and not even feel any sort of semblance of security in our lives. And, I think that is the most important conversation we can have. And I think it's going to take reading a lot of folks and indulging in poetry. I think it's going to require indulging in ourselves, in our history, in our culture. I think we need to read about coal miner rebellions in the early 1900s. I think we need to read about abolition work. I think we need to read The Warmth of Other Suns. I think we need to read so much to learn about ourselves, because the one thing that America does not do and our education does not do is we do not do a good job of teaching Americans about America.
Well, I want to thank you. You know, the reason I wanted to have you on as our first guest on this show is about challenging power, and so that's kind of an obvious connection. But we also talked about wanting to make this show a space where we actually listen and role model the kind of listening that is actually absent from our culture in so many respects. And you are not a talking point machine. You actually listen to questions and think while you're in the moment, and that's evident today. And just want to thank you so much for being our first guest, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
And we'll be right back. This is a time when people are turning to the media, not just for entertainment to keep themselves from going absolutely off the deep end, but for vital truth. Whether you're a news anchor or a kid with a TikTok account, you have the ear of the country and the world. And right now, that is an awesome responsibility. A responsibility my next guest has been challenging those of us in the media to take a little more seriously, including his own employer. Joining me now, one of the most recognizable voices, a man of many voices, the creator of such entertainments as Family Guy, Orville, and Ted, the movie, not the talks, Seth MacFarlane. Seth, welcome to the show.
How's it going?
Good. Thank you for being one of our inaugural guests.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
I want to tell you why I was excited to have you on. You are known for a certain blunt truth-telling in your comedy, behind a kind of curtain of animated characters in fiction. But of late, you have been speaking a different kind of blunt truth, not just through those characters, but about the media and about truth. I want to start with your most recent beef, the most dangerous, perhaps, physically dangerous, when you take on someone this powerful. You have gone after Oprah. Why?
Well, look, it's not a cut and dry situation there. I mean, again, as I said in the tweet, Oprah has spent her career doing a lot of altruistic things, given to a lot of charities, supported a lot of good causes, and has really, in many ways, used her platform for good. And the exception to that is the elevation of these purveyors of pseudoscience. People like Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, all the way back to Jenny McCarthy and the anti-vax movement. And it's a strange dichotomy that I think a lot of people, particularly right now, are having trouble reconciling. This person who's done all this positive work for the world, and yet somehow has gotten caught up in this web of junk science on many occasions. And so it's a tough thing to balance.
And you hope Oprah steps forward and as you've said, tries to play some role correcting the purveyors of misinformation who she has helped amplify over the years.
Yeah, I think that would be the right thing to do. And before I send out a tweet or before I make a public statement of any kind on any issue, I do try to make sure that I have all my facts straight, because I'm conscious of the reach that my voice has.
I got to say, that's really old-fashioned, particularly for someone part of the Fox empire. I mean, truth, research. It's it's not 19th century anymore, Seth. But I want to ask you about Fox. You have, and I really admire this, because a lot of people, you give them a paycheck, they stop telling the truth about anything covered by that paycheck. You've spoken about Laura Ingraham at Fox as being irresponsible. You've spoken about Tucker Carlson in the past. But I want to ask you a bigger picture question as someone who's seen that machinery, has understood it from the inside. We have this notion of a marketplace of ideas we often talked about, that if you have some bad actor, the theory goes, spewing bad information, eventually everything will be fine, better information will come in, the market will work, and the truth will win. It doesn't seem to be working with Fox. And when you have money allied with power and a media outlet in that form, do you think the remedy for Fox is better information, more truth-telling, people coming to their conscience because they see your tweet? Do you think we need to think about whether Fox should have the license to do what it does, whether that's a legal operation it's engaged in?
I mean, that's a question for a much bigger brain than mine.
I don't know, that hat seems quite large on this screen.
I mean, look, to me, there is always room for responsible journalism from all sides. I think, you look at the Wall Street Journal, take their op-ed section out of the picture, which is a little wackadoodie at times. That's not an irresponsible publication. It's a conservative publication, but I don't think anyone would say it's off the rails like Fox News. So I think it is, I don't think anybody's saying we want this to be Rachel Maddow. I think we're just saying, we want you to honor your duty to the truth.
Having seen the inside of these systems, when you think about you write characters who allow you to explore these ideas, and understanding human motivation is so central to the kind of work you do. How do you think about media barons like the Murdochs, who are so responsible for this cesspool of misinformation you talk about, but protect themselves, as we know, in ways that are inconsistent with what the network's putting out? How do you think about them as human beings?
It's a hard thing for me personally to reconcile, because I know the family. I have a friendly relationship with the family. And by the way, I've said, I've said point blank, I think you need to look at what you're doing and take a more active role. I think they're look, it's since I've been doing Family Guy, I have never gotten anything remotely, I've never experienced anything like censorship from that level. They have left us alone completely, even when our politics are aggressively liberal. And the same philosophy, as far as I can tell, applies to Fox News. It's just a very hands-off philosophy. And so it's there's a self-sustaining mechanism to Fox News that I think exists independently of all that. And so I am very comfortable, speaking candidly.
Is there a recognition of the reality you're describing, or is that like Seth is off his rocker again? And
Never. No, it's in the moment, it's always received very kindly and very respectfully. There's no eye rolling. There's no dismissive response. It's there's always an open ear. And what I have yet to see is a change in the network. And again, this network is hugely profitable. And at the end of the day, the company is a business, and that's what that's really the issue that we're all kind of fighting here. Is that it's people watch, and it's entertainment. It's going to be good guys and bad guys. It's going to be heroes and villains, and nothing is as simple as that. Every issue that we think is black and white is so nuanced, and I think to me that would be my biggest criticism of Fox News, is that the nuance is gone. I mean, the Laura Ingraham tweet was a perfect example. Of course, the Washington Post does not want this to go on forever. They have families. They're stuck at home too. It's not that simple. If that network could get on board with a responsible attitude toward science alone, I could live with all the other shit.
Now you're just getting crazy. I don't know what is in that hat. I'm going to thank you, Seth, for spending time with us on our inaugural show. The parting advice I would offer you, because I was once like you a couple weeks ago wearing a hat like that, and then I persuaded my quarantine buddy, my wife, who is now also my barber, to cut my hair. She studied a GQ article, took notes, and did it in the bathroom with clippers, scissors, and so find someone in your life, and just take the plunge.
I'm staring at my cat right now. I don't think giving him a pair of shears is really the best idea.
Cats are more deft with clippers.
Looks good.
Thank you so much for talking to us, and stay safe out there.
Thank you. You too.
And when I come back, our first musical guest at Seat at the Table, Taylor Mack. Welcome back. Joining me now, I'm so thrilled to introduce to you Seat at the Table's inaugural musical guest, Taylor Mack, to sing to us about this crisis faced by artists in New York, the epicenter of the pandemic. where so many people make a living from art and from, frankly, the gig economy that is the art and performance world. This is a moment from which many people fear they will never recover, and the line of work may not recover. And then we're going to talk about it a little bit. So I'm so thrilled to have you with us, Taylor Mack, and take it away.
That's so nice of you. Hi, and I thought I'd sing. I wrote this song for the because of the AIDS epidemic, but it works for this one too. Here we go. When all the artists leave or die, and you're alone on stage, naked and unrehearsed, grasping for lines and trying to save some grace. When all the fabric across the nation has been quilted and put on display, then will the earth be swallowed in comfort or be boxed and rented away? When all the fairies are dead and buried, then will the pixie dust be swept? When all the radicals die or are married, then will the tragedy end or begin? Then should we fasten our pig wings and our harnesses, and then should we fly to the grid? Then should we rise up away from the spotlight and wake in some cloud-filled bed? Or should we get out our red paint and our sparkle, our cardboard, our tinsel, our hokey home-crafted style? Then should we dress like some high-heeled snowflakes and baton down the streets in Hell's Miracle Mile? Yeah, crash Hell's Parade with a odd smile. Sleep well, get up, do it again, day after day after day, until the cockroaches are your only patrons. Even then you can lie down or get up and play. You can lie down or get up and play. You can lie down or get up and play. You can lie down or get up and play. You can lie down or get up and play.
Wow, that was extraordinary. Thank you for sharing that with us. Tell us about Trickle Up NYC.
I created with a bunch of other people a thing called trickleupnyc.org, and I asked them to donate content to the site. It's just original and exclusive video content, and we get people to, it's a paid subscription, $10 a month, and we get people to subscribe. And then every time we raise $10,000, we give it to an artist who doesn't have anything.
Thank you so much, and all the best to you in these times.
Thank you for having me. It's so sweet of you. trickleupnyc.org.
Well, that does it for our inaugural episode of Seat at the Table. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to Seth MacFarlane, and Taylor Mack as our first guests trying us out. And we'll see you right here on Vice TV next week, Wednesday at 10.